I'm Charlie Saunier from the Renegades of Puck, and this is the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. The Canadian National Exhibition, the City of Toronto, and the NHL reach agreement on the construction of a Hall of Fame building on the CNE grounds in Toronto. The Hall of Fame names 4 new inductees: George Boucher, Silvio Mantha, Frank Selke, and Jack Walker, bringing the total number of members to 71. The Maple Leafs, who acquired Red Kelly from Detroit in late 1959-60, moved the defenseman to center. On November 27, 1960, Gordie Howe scores his 1,000th point. On January 16, 1961, Chicago goalie Glenn Hall plays his 500th straight game, including the playoffs. Just as in 1959-60, Montreal finishes first, Toronto second, Chicago third, and Detroit fourth, the Canadiens go 41-19-10 to edge the Maple Leafs by 2 points. Montreal leads the NHL in scoring for the 8th straight year, 254 goals. Montreal's Bernie Geoffrion finishes the season with 50 goals, becoming just the second player ever to do so. He leads the NHL in both goals and total points, 95. Toronto's Frank Mahovlich finishes second in goals with 48. Montreal's Jean Beliveau is first in the league in assists with 58, second in points with 90. Toronto's Frank Mahovlich, 84 points, Rangers' Andy Bathgate, 77 points, and Gordie Howe, 72 points, round out the top 5 scorers. Andy Bathgate leads the Rangers in scoring for the 6th straight season with 29 goals and 77 points, but the team fails to make the playoffs. The Bruins put 22-year-old rookie Bruce Gamble in goal and finished 6th, losing 42 out of 70 games. Toronto's Johnny Bower, getting better and better at age 36, leads the league in goals against average, 2.50. Chicago's Pierre Pilote leads the league in penalty minutes with 165, while teammate Reggie Fleming is second with 145. Wayne Gretzky is born January 26, 1961, Brantford, Ontario. The playoffs feature Montreal versus Chicago and Detroit versus Toronto. The Leafs defeat the Wings in Game 1 of the semifinals 3-2 as George Armstrong scores in double overtime. After dropping the opener, the Red Wings defeat Toronto in each of the next 4 games as Terry Sawchuk shines in goal. The Canadiens, seeking their 6th straight cup, trounce the Blackhawks 6-2 in their semifinal opener. The Blackhawks upset the Habs 4-3 in Game 2 at Montreal. Chicago then wins Game 3 2-1 at home on Murray Balfour's triple overtime winner. Following Game 3, Montreal coach Toe Blake attacks referee Dalton MacArthur, is fined $2,000. Montreal evens the series with a 5-2 win in Game 4, but Glenn Hall tallies a pair of 3-0 shutouts, Game 5 and Game 6, to eliminate the defending champs. Chicago and Detroit meet in the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 1934. Chicago beats Detroit 3-2 in Game 1 of the Finals. Detroit wins Game 2 3-1, and Chicago prevails by the same score in Game 3. The Wings take Game 4 2-1. Chicago's powerhouse offense erupts in Game 5. Stan Mikita and Murray Balfour each score twice in Chicago's 6-3 triumph. 5 different Hawks beat Wings goalie Hank Bassin for a 5-1 cup-clinching win in Game 6. The Blackhawks raise their first Stanley Cup since 1938. Montreal's Bernie Geoffrion, recipient of the Art Ross Trophy, wins the Hart Trophy, edging Toronto goalie Johnny Bower. Red Kelly, 3-time Lady Byng Trophy winner with Detroit, wins his first Lady Byng with the Maple Leafs. Johnny Bower wins the Vezina Trophy, his first, ending the 5-year reign of Montreal goalie Jacques Plante. Dave Keon, with 20 rookie goals, beats out Toronto teammate Bob Nevin, 21 goals, for the Calder. Montreal's Doug Harvey, the top-scoring defenseman in the NHL, 39 points, wins his 6th Norris Trophy in 7 years. Denver wins its 2nd straight NCAA championship, routing St. Lawrence 12-2 in the finals. Denver's Bill Masterton is the tourney's MVP. Future star defenseman Paul Coffey is born June 1st, 1961 in Weston, Ontario. Bernie Geoffrion, playing in his 11th season, won his 2nd scoring title in 1960-61 and became only the 2nd man in league history to record 50 goals in a single season, following in the footsteps of his former teammate, Maurice the Rocket Richard. On March 16, 1961, before a delirious Forum crowd, the 30-year-old Geoffrion beat Toronto goalie Cesar Maniago for his final goal of the year. He went scoreless in 2 more games. Montreal entered the 1961 Stanley Cup playoffs as 5-time defending champions in search of an unprecedented 6th straight title. At the helm was their fiery genius coach, Toe Blake, bench boss of their previous 5 cups. Following a Game 3 triple overtime loss to Chicago in the opening round, Blake attacked referee Dalton MacArthur, whom Blake felt overlooked several calls against his players. Toe was later fined $2,000 by the NHL. The 1960-61 campaign was a personal showcase for Blackhawks goalie Glenn Hall. On January 16, 1961, the future Hall of Famer played in an unprecedented 500th consecutive game. He led the league with 6 shutouts, was third overall in goals against average at 2.57, and was the runner-up to Toronto's Johnny Bower for the Vezina Trophy. Hall was brilliant in the playoffs, winning 8 games in 12 outings with a 2.25 goals against average and a pair of shutouts. Far from the bruising chaos of the NHL in the smallish town of Brantford, Ontario, Wayne Gretzky was born on January 26, 1961. By age 3, he was already an adroit skater. By the time he was 9, he was playing with and beating teenagers. An avid fan of Detroit legend Gordie Howe, young Wayne donned the number 9 jersey that would eventually turn into his famous 99. His first pair of skates and a bronze casting of his feet sit in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Known as Mr. Hockey to his face and Mr. Elbows behind his back, Gordie Howe pioneered new territory for NHL scorers during the 1960-61 season. On November 27, 1960, during a 2-0 win over the visiting Maple Leafs, Howe notched an assist and became the first player in NHL history to reach the 1,000-point plateau. Hull joined him 11 years later as just the 5th NHLer to record 1,000 points. If the charismatic Punch Imlach wasn't the most dominant off-ice NHL personality of the 1960s, he was certainly right up there. Toronto originally hired Imlach in the late 1950s as an assistant general manager, but he took over as coach in 59-60 and guided the Leafs to the finals in his first 2 seasons. The 1960-61 Leafs were impressive, going 39-19-12. However, they were upset in the semifinals by Detroit largely because young Leafs such as forwards Dave Keon, Bob Nevin, and Eddie Shack had yet to fully acclimate to Imlach's system. In 1961-62, though, all the pieces were in place for a championship team. Besides the aforementioned trio, Punch had a neck-rib defense that mixed smart veterans like Alan Stanley and Tim Horton with aggressive youngster Carl Brewer and Bob Baughan. Bert Olmsted, the best corner man in hockey, still had his legs, while Frank Mahovlich was an all-star at left wing. Ancient Johnny Bower still shined in goal. From top to bottom, there was not a weak link in the chain. The Leafs had plenty of injuries in 61-62, but they overcame each one in a race that featured 3 top clubs: the defending champion Blackhawks, the proud Canadiens, and Imlach's Torontonians. Although the Habs finished first with a record of 42-14-14, Imlach was unconcerned. "We were ready for the playoffs," Punch said. The Canadiens appeared just as ready after beating Chicago in their first 2 playoff games. However, Chicago stunned the Habs with 4 straight victories to advance. Meanwhile, Toronto had its hands full with New York after the Rangers rallied to tie the series at 2 apiece. But the Leafs' double overtime winning Game 5 opened the gates and they triumphed in 6 games to reach the finals. Toronto took the first 2 finals games at home, but the bruising Blackhawks bashed their way to 2 victories in Chicago. "Some people figured we were through, that we wouldn't win another game against them," said Imlach, "but we had something left, including a whole team of players who didn't scare." Sure enough, Toronto won Game 5 8-4 and then returned to Chicago Stadium for one of the toughest Cup final games ever played. It was 0-0 well into the third period before Bobby Hull put the Hawks ahead 1-0. The crowd delayed the game for 10 precious minutes with a hail of celebratory debris. However, the premature demonstration cost the home club its momentum and the lead as Bob Nevin scored almost immediately after the faceoff. Toronto then took its first Stanley Cup in 11 years on Dick Duff's gamer a few minutes later. When the game was over, Imlach recalled, "Bert Olmsted was so tired that he couldn't get off the bench, so I had to lean close to him to hear what he said. He told me, 'It's been a long haul, Punch.'" For the Leafs, though, it was only the beginning of another hockey dynasty. Punch Imlach's club would successfully defend the Stanley Cup in 1963 and again in 1964. The NHL rules that penalty shots will now be taken by the player against whom the foul is committed rather than a designee. The Hockey Hall of Fame officially opens in Toronto August 21, 1961. The Hall of Fame names 17 inductees, including Syl Apps, Charlie Conacher, Hap Day, George Hainsworth, Joe Hall, Maurice Richard, and Milt Schmidt. Harold Ballard, Stafford Smythe, son of Conn Smythe, and John Bassett purchased controlling interest in Maple Leafs Gardens en route to taking over the team. New York fires Al Pike after 2 losing years and installs ex-Habs star Doug Harvey as player and coach. The Canadiens win the regular season title for the 5th year in a row, going 42-14-14. Toronto finishes second for the 3rd straight year. Chicago's Bobby Hull leads the league with 50 goals, becoming the 3rd player in NHL history to hit the number exactly. New York's Andy Bathgate paces the NHL in assists with 56 and ties Bobby Hull for the league lead in points with 84. 3 players, Detroit's Gordie Howe, Toronto's Frank Mahovlich, and Montreal's Claude Provost, tie for second in goals with 33. Stan Mikita, the Blackhawks' newest superstar center, is second in assists with 52 and ties Gordie Howe for third in points with 77. Billy Hay, who centers Bobby Hull's line in Chicago, ties teammate Stan Mikita for second in the NHL in assists with 52. Jacques Plante leads the NHL in victories with 42 goals against, average 2.37. Chicago's Glenn Hall leads the league in shutouts with 9, third in goals against, average 2.66. In his new role as Montreal's enforcer, Lou Fontinato captures his 3rd penalty title, 167 penalty minutes. He's followed by Boston rookie terrible Ted Green with 116. Red Kelly runs for office in Canadian Parliament and wins. He also scores 22 goals for the Leafs. On March 14, 1962, Gordie Howe scores his 500th goal, joining Maurice Richard in the two-man club. Gordie Howe's 77 points aren't enough to keep Detroit from finishing out of the playoffs for only the 2nd time in 24 years. The playoffs feature Montreal versus Chicago and Toronto versus New York. The Blackhawks and Canadiens face off in the semis, and Montreal wins the first 2 games. Chicago defeats Montreal in each of the next 4 games, outscoring the Canadiens 15-7 to pull off a mild upset and advance to the finals. Toronto and the Rangers are tied after 4 games, but Red Kelly scores in double OT of Game 5. The Leafs crush New York 7-1 in the decisive 6th semifinal game. Bobby Hull opens the scoring in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals, but Toronto nets 4 unanswered goals to win 4-1. 2 goals by Chicago's Stan Mikita in Game 2 are wasted as the Leafs go on to win 3-2. Glenn Hall shuts out the Leafs 3-0 in Game 3 of the Finals. In Game 4, Bobby Hull and Reggie Fleming each score twice to lead the Hawks to a 4-1 win. The powerful Leafs attack explodes for 8 goals in Game 5, 3 by Bob Pulford and 2 more by Frank Mahovlich. The Leafs win 8-4 and take a 3-2 lead in games. Bobby Hull's 3rd period goal gives the Hawks a 1-0 lead in Game 6. However, Bob Nevin ties it for Toronto, and Dick Duff scores at 14-14 of the 3rd period. Toronto wins 2-1 to clinch the cup. Toronto's Tim Horton sets a playoff record with 13 assists by defenseman. Stan Mikita leads all playoff scorers with 21 points. Though they tied with 84 points, Bobby Hull wins the Art Ross Trophy over Andy Bathgate because he had more goals, 50 versus 28. Montreal goalie Jacques Plante wins his 6th Vezina Trophy. He also captures his only Hart Trophy. Montreal's Bobby Rousseau with 21 goals wins the Calder Trophy. Player coach Doug Harvey wins his 7th and final Norris Trophy. Toronto's Dave Keon nabs his 1st Lady Byng Trophy. Michigan Tech captures the NCAA Hockey Championship with a 7-1 win over Clarkson in the finals. Tech's Lou Agnotti is named the tournament's MVP. After 14 brilliant seasons in Montreal, during which he won 6 Norris trophies, Doug Harvey left the Habs for New York to become player coach of the Rangers, actually commuting home to his family in Montreal whenever possible. Harvey's Rangers finished 4th in 1961-62, just 4 points ahead of Detroit, but the veteran backliner notched 30 points and won his 7th Norris Trophy. The 1961-62 season was a difficult one for the Rangers, who lost more games, 32, than they won, 26, and were eliminated by Toronto in the playoffs. However, Winnipeg native Andy Bathgate, skating in his 10th NHL season, had a share in his 1st scoring title, tying Chicago's Bobby Hull with most points, 84, while leading the league in assists with 54. Bathgate also notched the 200th goal of his career. Stan Mikita, emerging as a two-way threat in the NHL, finished the 1961-62 season with 25 goals and 97 penalty minutes, combining skill with an extremely nasty disposition to achieve his goals. Playing with Ab McDonald and Kenny Warham, Mikita tied Billy Hay for the team lead in assists with 52 and established himself as a big league playmaker, finishing 4th in the league in scoring with 77 points. On March 25, 1962, Bobby Hull became the 3rd NHL player ever to score 50 goals in a season. During a 4-1 loss at Madison Square Garden, Hull fired a 10-footer past Rangers goalie Gump Worsley as Reggie Fleming awaited a rebound that never came, and Rangers defenseman Doug Harvey struggled in vain to bring down the Golden Jet. Hull switched to his famous number 9 the following year. On August 26, 1961, Canadian Prime Minister John Diefenbaker officially opened the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto on the site of the Canadian National Exhibition. The building featured the flags of all 6 NHL teams. The late James D. Norris was credited with being among the most ardent supporters of a hockey shrine, and along with Toronto hockey genius Conn Smythe, did much of the preliminary work to ensure financial support was in place. It was a measure of Gordie Howe's comprehensive scoring skills that he outlasted his Hall of Fame line mates Ted Lindsay and Sid Abel, and continued to be a league leader many years later. After Abel retired, Alex Del Vecchio became Howe's center, followed by Norm Ullman. In every case, Howe never missed a beat. At age 34 in 1962-63, number 9 was outskating and outshooting players a dozen years younger and outfighting the biggest, toughest brutes as well. Rangers defenseman Lou Fontinato made the discovery a couple of years earlier when Howe pulverized him in a bout at Madison Square Garden. "Gordie is likely the greatest hockey player that ever played," said Bobby Hull, the Blackhawks ace, "and he's likely the best who will ever play." Howe had scored his 500th career goal in March 1962 and was zeroing in on Maurice Richard's record of 544. Gordie remained at the top of his game because he did everything: skate, stick handle, and shoot better than his contemporaries. He was averaging 40 to 45 minutes per game on the ice, twice the ice time put in by most NHL forwards. Describing his attack style, Howe explained, "Many times when I hit the blue line, I have no idea what I'm going to do to put the puck in the net. The more expert a player becomes with every shot in the bag, the less time he wastes worrying about it, and the more worrisome he is to the goalkeeper." Goalies worried plenty about Howe in 62-63. He won the scoring title, 38 goals, 48 assists for 86 points, and his 6th Hart Trophy, setting a new record. While many players were copying Hull's and Andy Bathgate's slap shots, Howe invented and perfected a more controllable drive, the wrist slap shot. He explained the blade of the stick should come back waist high or higher on the backswing and should hit the puck clearly off the heel. "I snap my wrists as I hit the puck." Under Howe's orchestration, the Red Wings displayed a wide-open, non-restricted type of assault that had forwards sweep down the ice in a series of crisscross designs. Gordie called it the play-it-by-ear attack, and it changed the basic assault pattern in pro hockey. Though the Wings finished 4th in 62-63, Howe did pace the Wings to a semifinal playoff upset over the Blackhawks, pushing Detroit in the finals against the Maple Leafs. Despite Howe's Promethean efforts, the Red Wings finished almost as quickly as the finals began. Dick Duff scored twice in the first 68 seconds of the first contest. Toronto went on to win in 5 games. "I never had much doubt about our ability to beat Detroit after that," said Maple Leaf GM coach Punch Imlach. Howe, though, would continue to strike fear in his opponents. He made the All-Star team in 1964 and again in 1965. In fact, Gordie would make 6 more All-Star trips by 1970, giving him 22 such appearances. Howe wouldn't hang up his skates for good until 1980 at the age of 52, 34 years after he first entered the league. Among the 33 Hall of Fame inductees are Punch Broadbent, Harry Cameron, Reg Noble, Sweeney Schreiner, and Nell Stewart. On June 6, 1962, the site of Bill Barilko's 1951 plane crash is discovered in northern Ontario. In New York, Doug Harvey resigns his coaching duties but remains a player with the Rangers. When the last-place Bruins win just one of their first 14 games, coach Phil Watson is fired. Milt Schmidt returns to the Boston bench. Glenn Hall's consecutive game streak ends at 502 when a back injury forces him briefly out of the lineup. The Maple Leafs win the regular season title for the first time since 47-48. They finish 35-23-12, 1 point ahead of Chicago. Johnny Bower and Don Simmons, acquired from Boston for Ed Chadwick, provide solid goaltending for the Leafs while Frank Mahovlich leads the attack. After 5 straight years atop the standings, Montreal finishes 3rd, 3 points out of 1st. The Canadiens do lead the league in goals, though, 225 for the 10th straight year. Gordie Howe paces the NHL in goals with 38 and wins his 6th and last scoring title with 86 points. Camille Henry, the Rangers' wiry center, enjoys a career year with 37 goals, while teammate Andy Bathgate is 2nd in the league in scoring with 81 points. Maple Leaf star Frank Mahovlich is 3rd in the league in goals with 36. He ties Montreal's Henry Richard for 4th in points with 73. Stan Mikita tallies 31 goals and 76 points for the Blackhawks and trails only Gordie Howe and Andy Bathgate in the scoring race. Playing beside Gordie Howe and Alex Del Vecchio, left winger Parker McDonald scores a career-high 33 goals for Detroit. Terry Sawchuk has an outstanding season in Detroit, leading the NHL in goals against average, 2.48. Montreal Jacques Plante is 2nd in goals against average, 2.49, and ties Chicago's Glenn Hall for 1st in shutouts with 5. Detroit's Howie Young sets a new standard for rough play when he spends 273 minutes in the box. Lou Fontanato's career ends when he misses a hit on Rangers rookie Vic Hadfield, crashes into the boards, crushing a cervical vertebrae, suffering brief paralysis. Boom Boom Jeffrion misses 5 games when he's banned for throwing his gear at referee Vern Buffy. The playoff featured Toronto versus Montreal, Detroit versus Chicago. The defending champion Leafs win the first 3 games of the semifinals. Montreal staves off elimination with 3-1 victory in Game 4, but the Leafs shut out the Habs 5-0 in Game 5 to advance to the finals. The Red Wings are heavy underdogs in their semifinal series with Chicago, especially after dropping the first 2 games 5-4 and 5-2. Shockingly, the Red Wings rattle off 4 straight wins against Chicago as Terry Sawchuk shines in goal. The Stanley Cup Finals pit rivals Detroit and Toronto, with the Wings having won 6 of the last 7 playoff meetings. The Leafs erupt for 3 quick goals in Game 1 to win 4-2. Ed Litzenberger scores for Toronto in the first 6 minutes of Game 2, and the Leafs go on to win 4-2. Detroit rookie Alex Faulkner, the first native of Newfoundland to play in the NHL, scores 2 goals for the Red Wings in Game 3 of the finals as Detroit wins 3-2. Dave Keon breaks a 2-2 tie in the third period of Game 4, and Red Kelly adds insurance as the Leafs win 4-2. They're 1 win away from repeating as Cup champions. Free-spirited winger Eddie Shack, an unlikely scoring hero, nets the cup-clinching goal at 6:32 left in Game 5. Toronto wins 3-1. Dave Keon leads the Leafs in scoring with 12 points, but Detroit's Gordie Howe and Norm Ullman tie for the playoff scoring lead with 16 points. Detroit legend Gordie Howe wins his 6th Hart Trophy, beating out Chicago's Stan Mikita. Dave Keon wins his 2nd straight Lady Byng Trophy, while teammate Kent Douglas captures the Calder Trophy. Glenn Hall captures his first Vezina Trophy, topping Toronto's Johnny Bower and Don Simmons. Chicago's hard-hitting Pierre Pilote wins the first of his 3 straight Norris trophies. Toronto's Carl Brewer is runner-up. North Dakota nips Denver 6-5 in the finals to win the NCAA Hockey Championship. North Dakota forward Al McLean is named tournament MVP. The Soviet Union begins its dominance in international hockey as it wins its first of 9 straight world championships. Muscleman Lou Fontanato, who skated for the Rangers and Canadiens during his 9-year career, suffered a career-ending injury during the 1962-63 season when he missed a body check on Rangers rookie Vic Hadfield and crashed into the boards. Fontanato, a fearless fighter and a friendly, colorful character, sustained crushed cervical vertebrae and some brief paralysis, ending his NHL journey with 26 goals and 1,247 penalty minutes in 535 games. On June 6, 1962, the site of Bill Barilko's 1951 plane crash was discovered in northern Ontario. Barilko starred for Toronto during a brief 5-year career, one that ended when he was just 24 years old. His most famous goal was his last, a sudden death winner against Montreal to clinch the 1951 Stanley Cup. Despite his charming smile and good looks, Detroit defenseman Howie Young was a fearsome figure on the ice. In 1962-63, Young established a new standard of miscreant behavior when he was whistled for an astonishing 273 penalty minutes, 4.26 per game. Prior to Young's not-so-sterling achievement, the NHL record for single-season penalty minutes had belonged to Lou Fontanato of the 1955-56 Rangers, 202 minutes in 70 games. While its competitors in professional basketball, football, and baseball expanded across the continent, big league hockey remained a 6-team cocoon in the 63-64 season. The upside of this was that only the highest quality performers could play in the NHL, which meant hockey's superstars were really something special. 2 of the most interesting glamour boys, Frank Mahovlich and Bobby Hull, were totally contrasting personalities, although they had much in common on the ice. Hull, who skated for the Blackhawks, was aptly nicknamed the Golden Jet. His blonde hair, broad smile, and natural good looks gave him a magnetism attained by few players in big league sports. This attractiveness was further embellished by his style. Hull had turned a slap shot into a lethal weapon, intimidating goalies whenever he wound up. Hull's shot was only one feature in his armament. Bobby's mighty legs and equally powerful arms enabled him to withstand body checks that would have demoralized lesser players. With such raw power at his disposal, Hull could have been a menacing player, but he chose to play clean hockey. By contrast, Toronto's Mahovlich was a brooding introvert who could not enjoy the center stage on which Hull reveled. But once on the ice, the Big M was a riveting figure. His long, smooth strides gave him superior driving power, not unlike Hull's, and his shot created similar thunder. What Mahovlich lacked in superficial glamour, he more than made up with his intrinsic grace. He was the Robert Redford among hockey players and the centerpiece of a Toronto club that had won Stanley Cups in 62 and 63. Blocking the Leafs' route in 63-64 was a Blackhawks club oozing with talent. Alongside Hull was an incendiary and creative stick handler who had emigrated from Czechoslovakia to Canada as a youth and now ranked among the NHL's best centers. Unlike Mahovlich and Hull, Stan Mikita wore his truculence on his sleeve. He fought everyone in sight while moving right to the top of the scoring list. In 63-64, he led all NHL players in points, 39 goals, 50 assists, 89 total points. The Canadiens debuted a glamour player of their own in Yvon Conure. Yvon played just a fraction of the 63-64 season for the Habs, but the speedy road runner would soon become the most popular Montreal player since Rocket Richard. Montreal, which went a league-best 36-21-13, and Chicago were both upset in the playoffs, however, as Mahovlich's Leafs and Gordie Howe's Red Wings reached the finals. The series went a full 7 games before another one of the 1960s glamour skaters, Toronto's Andy Bathgate, scored the cup-winning goal. The presence of these superstars sparked interest in hockey across the continent. Other major league cities, attracted by Hull, Mahovlich, Mikita, etc., clamored for teams of their own. Reacting to the pressure, some NHL leaders, led by New York's Bill Jennings, began laying plans for expansion. The Hall of Fame nominates 7 new members, including Ebby Goodfellow, Joe Primo, and Earl Siebert. On January 5, 1963, at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Toronto, a total of 21 players are selected by the NHL teams in the first ever amateur draft. The Central Professional Hockey League is formed with clubs operated by NHL franchises. These farm teams are formed in the Midwestern cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Indianapolis, and Omaha. The Rangers swapped goalie Gump Worsley to Montreal for Jacques Plante, Phil Goyette, and Don Marshall. On November 10, 1963, Terry Sawchuk shuts out Montreal for his 94th career whitewash, tying him with Hall. During the Red Wings' November 10 shutout of Montreal, Gordie Howe scores his 545th career goal, surpassing Maurice Richard for the all-time lead. A late-season blockbuster trade sees Andy Bathgate, the Rangers' perennial scoring champ, swapped with Don McKenney to Toronto for Arnie Brown, Dick Duff, Bob Nevin, Rod Sealing, and Bill Collins. Montreal, 36-21-13, finishes first, 1 point ahead of Chicago. Chicago's Bobby Hull leads the league in goals with 43. Chicago's Stan Mikita is second in both goals, 39, and assists, 50. He leads the league in points, 89. Andy Bathgate, who splits the season between New York and Toronto, leads the NHL in assists with 58, fourth in points with 77. Chicago's Ken Warham, 39, New York's Camille Henry, 29, and Montreal star Jean Beliveau, 28, round out the top 5 goal scorers. Trailing Stan Mikita in the overall scoring race are Bobby Hull with 87 points, Jean Beliveau with 78, Andy Bathgate with 77, and Gordie Howe with 73. Chicago defenseman Pierre Pilote cracks the top 5 assist makers with 46 and the NHL's top scoring defender with 53 points. Johnny Bower, the Maple Leafs' 39-year-old goalie, wins the goals against average title, 2.11. Montreal and stars Charlie Hodge in goal. He wins 33 games, compiles a league-leading 8 shutouts. On February 1, 1964, left-winger Bobby Rousseau of the Canadiens burns Detroit goalie Roger Crozier for 5 goals. The playoffs feature Montreal versus Toronto and Detroit versus Chicago. The 2-time defending champion Maple Leafs engage Montreal in a seesaw battle as the Habs win games 1, 3, and 5, while the Leafs take games 2, 4, and 6. The Leafs hold Montreal's powerful offense to just 1 goal in Game 7 of the semis. They score 3 goals of their own to advance to the finals. In the other semis matchup, Detroit and Chicago battle back and forth and are tied 3-3 after 6 games. Detroit wins Game 7 4-2. The finals are tightly fought, with 5 of the first 6 games decided by 1 goal. Toronto wins Game 1 3-2 when Bob Pulford beats Terry Sawchuk with just 2 seconds left in the third period. Detroit musters a 4-3 win in Game 2 as Larry Jeffrey scores 7:52 of overtime. In yet another thriller, Detroit's Alex Delvecchio wins Game 3 4-3 as he scores with 17 seconds left in the game. The Leafs take Game 4 of the finals 4-2 thanks to a pair of goals from Dave Keon plus Andy Bathgate's winner midway through the third period. In Game 5, Gordie Howe and Eddie Joyal scored to give Detroit a 2-1 win and a 3-2 series lead. Toronto's Bobby Baugh, a rugged defenseman, scores .243 into sudden death to win Game 6 and tie the finals at 3 games each. Andy Bathgate scores the cup-clinching goal for Toronto in Game 7 as Johnny Bower throws a 4-0 shutout against Detroit. Detroit's Gordie Howe is the playoffs' leading scorer with 19 points for the 6th time in his career. Montreal's Jean Beliveau wins the Hart Trophy, edging out Bobby Hull. Chicago winger Ken Warham wins the Lady Byng Trophy. Montreal's Charlie Hodge captures the Vezina Trophy. Montreal defenseman Jacques Laperriere beats teammate John Ferguson to win the Calder Trophy. Chicago's Pierre Pilote takes second straight Norris Trophy. In the Olympics, the Soviet Union captures its first of 4 straight hockey gold medals. Michigan wins an all-time record 7th and last NCAA title, beating Denver 6-3 in the finals. Wolverines goalie Bob Gray is the tournament MVP. The 1964 Olympics at Innsbruck, Austria featured a gold medal hockey matchup between the Soviet Union, in search of its second hockey title, and Canada, winner of 6 of the last 9 gold medals in hockey. The Soviets notched a 3-2 win over the Canadians, beating goalie Ken Broderick for the winner. The Soviet team went 8-0 in the Olympics. Ever since his Canadians were bludgeoned out of the 1961 Stanley Cup playoffs by Chicago, Montreal's managing director Frank Selke Sr. realized that a major roster change was necessary. Skilled players such as Jean Beliveau and J.C. Tremblay required protection from enemy tough guys, yet the Habs were egregiously weak in the muscle department. Selke finally got the word out to his scouts: find a muscle man who can play. In 1963, Montreal Bird Dogs found their man in Cleveland, where John Bowie Ferguson was terrorizing foes of the American League's Cleveland Barons. Built like a bull, Ferguson made the Canadiens varsity and was placed on a line with captain Senator Beliveau, who had seen so many terribly abusive moments by enemy marauders. Starting with the Bruins' mean defenseman Ted Green, Ferguson mopped up every significant enemy goon until the Canadiens began to obtain considerably more room and respect. For more physical support, Selke again reached the American League and signed Ted Harris out of Springfield. In no time at all, Harris and Ferguson became the NHL's top enforcer tandem. In 64-65, the Canadiens fused the tough and smooth elements together for a solid second-place finish, 36-23-11. Montreal finished just 4 points behind the first-place Red Wings. The Blackhawks finished third, even though Bobby Hull won the Hart and Lady Byng Trophy. Stan Mikita took the Art Ross with 28 goals, 59 assists for 87 points, and Pierre Pilote nabbed the Norris. The Maple Leafs, who were growing tired of Punch Imlach's iron-fisted coaching techniques, dropped to 4th and faced Montreal in the first round of the playoffs. The Maple Leafs, trying to win their 4th straight Stanley Cup, couldn't handle the muscular Habs. Montreal won the first 2 games at home, lost 2 in Toronto, and then rebounded 3-1 and 4-3 in overtime to oust the champs. Meanwhile, Chicago edged past Detroit in 7 games, setting up a classic final that would also go the 7-game limit. Unlike the 1961 Chicago-Montreal series, in which the Hawks vehemently out-hit the Habs, the 1965 finals featured Ferguson and Harris intimidating the Hawks. In Game 7, Beliveau beat Glenn Hall just 14 seconds into the game. Before the 17-minute mark, Chicago was down 3-0, and coup de grace was applied by Ferguson and his fists. He challenged the Hawks' Eric Nestorenko, knocking him and his club out of cup contention. "I warned Nestorenko that he was going to get it, and he got it," said Ferguson. It has been said that the sight of Nestorenko unconscious on the ice demoralized the Blackhawks, and maybe it did. "We shut down Hull, Mikita, and Ken Warham completely and watched the clock click off our 4-0 win." The Stanley Cup win reinforced the logic of Selke's enforcer plan. Other teams in the league immediately realized the importance of a guy like Ferguson, and soon each team was searching for its own tough cop. I'm Charlie Saunier from the Renegades of Puck, and this has been the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. If you'd like to support more projects like this, please follow the Renegades of Puck on all social media platforms and also visit renegadesofpuck.com.